Welcome back to the Common Resilience Podcast. We're a collective of 6 trauma trained and certified coaches from different personal and professional backgrounds, different life experiences, and a variety of coaching specialties who come together to share our experiences with many of life's trials and triumphs to discover what it is that we all have in common: our resilience. We're happy to have you here, and we invite you to join us every week as we share more about who we are and all the ways that we navigate winding roads and build resilience and strength on the foundations of our experiences, all while having a little bit of fun and play. Today, we continue our conversation about the friendship wound. We'll be talking about the impact that losing a friend can have on us, how might people-pleasing behaviors make it hard to establish genuine connections with people, and the hurt that we can feel when a friend suddenly ghosts us. So kick back and listen in. So I think maybe what we can do is shift if we want to move into what it is like to heal through this. And what is it, I talked about people pleasing for me personally being a big part. Like I realized through my own shadow work, right? Especially lately, and healing through my own friendship wounds. This has really been about my own need to heal through this very, very, very deeply embedded feeling like I need to please everybody so that everybody will like me, everybody will love me, and everybody will accept me. And at the end of the day, that really meant just like, if I could please everybody, then I would be worthy. I'd be worthy of the love and the acceptance. Um, and again, going back to the nuance of it, right? Like healing the friendship wound doesn't always mean that you got to heal people through people pleasing, right? Deb, you talked about healing through intimacy issues, and I think that's a big thing. So what are you guys, or you know what, let's back up a little bit. Like what impact has losing a friend had on you? And then maybe we can revisit how, what might have you have done for yourself to sort of move through that, or have you?
Well, for me, when I was growing up, I've moved several times, and I never really was connected with anybody enough to grieve their loss in my life when I moved. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we're all quote friends on social media, but I never connect with them.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, folks, if any of you are watching this. um, I was not capable of connecting in an intimate way. I was capable of enjoying a moment with whatever activity I might have been doing with somebody or talking about surface level things, but I wasn't capable of being present to my own emotions enough to be able to share that with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So in my more recent years, as I'm learning how to do that, then friendships that I have been cultivating with that context are more difficult, and there is more grief when there's
Mm-hmm.
separation and disconnection. So it's sad to grieve, and I've had friends suddenly pass away too, and grieving is a newer thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a beauty to grieving that I did not expect, especially
Yeah.
when I share that with other people that care about that person too.
Mm-hmm.
One of my closest friends died a few years ago, and I spent time with their family members. We talked about my friend with my family members because they were a family friend, and being able to laugh about things and cry about, and just, share memories and share that with others was a very bonding and powerful experience. And I came out of that feeling grateful that I felt connected enough with somebody to grieve their loss in my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Deb, I'm glad you brought that up because when you describe that process, I get the impression of like that is a primal, tribal human instinct to share with friends and family the loss of a loved one, or even a member of a community, not even necessarily a loved one, but it's a ritual that is as old as human tribes are. And so I like that you brought that up in that context.
You you asked me you talked about how you move through, right? What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we talked about grieving. Um, I can't say that I have had very many friendships from childhood. Deb, like you, there was a lot of movement in my growing up years, and so getting connected with folks was not something that was possible, and in a lot of cases, just like it wasn't encouraged in the way that
Mm-hmm.
you make friends. What was encouraged was being responsible. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, the experience that I've had is the relationship, while it needs to be two-way, it's a known that you are
Mm-hmm.
responsible, as in you, Oak. You are to make sure the person is okay. You're to make sure that they're um, that every this there's this been this leadership responsibility kind of expectation,
Mm-hmm.
and so forming deep friendships where there was equanimity, or there was acceptance of each other for being human beings is a relatively new concept for me. And
Mm-hmm.
so what's been difficult is grieving the knowledge. That's been hard for me. Learning how to form relationships and grieving the fact that I am where I am in life and I don't have them and I've never
Mm-hmm.
had them. And now realizing that, it's like, oh my gosh, how do you not? Everybody has these things. Richard, you talked about a group that you're with, that you've been with for 6 years. You talked about childhood friends. It's such a, I've heard these terms, right? It's not like I'm not familiar, but it's such a foreign concept to me for real,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like tangibly, because it's never been a thing for me. And so, when you're questioning, back to your question, how do you deal with that? Well, for me, I'm grieving the knowledge of the fact that I don't have this. And so it's a different kind of grieving process.
Mm-hmm.
But how I get to this point, or how I move through that grief, is I've been putting myself in situations that are absolutely uncomfortable, but 100% safe, right? As safe as they can be,
Mm-hmm.
physically, and also as safe as is possible emotionally. So getting connected with volunteer organizations, getting connected with things that I'm passionate about, or I think that I might be passionate about, and I'm interested in, and dipping my toe in the water and thinking, okay, well, let me see if I can be of help in this group
Mm-hmm.
or for what this group
Mm-hmm.
does. And through that, connecting with people and trying to form friendships. And
Yeah.
just in the last 12 months, that has been that I've seen the benefits of that, but it's pretty super new. Like it's really new.
Yeah.
So for me, grieving the
Congratulations.
knowledge of the lack is, I'm a very physical person, so doing something that allows me to move through that fear is has been
Mm-hmm.
helpful.
I love to hear that, Oak,
Mm-hmm.
that you're moving through that, and the it's really interesting. The type of grief that you described is another form, yet another form of disenfranchised grief
Mm-hmm.
that which seems to be coming up in my world quite a bit. I'm hearing
Mm-hmm.
lots of stories of people grieving either things they didn't know they didn't have, or things they know they can never have, or
Mm-hmm.
you know, we tend to think of grief as the loss of something tangible or known, and this whole concept of disenfranchised grief is just as valid and just as prevalent, but you don't hear about it very much. But your description, Oak, was a perfect description of a form of disenfranchised grief.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a concept that a song that I like called "Death Without a Funeral" kind of encompasses that. If somebody passes away, there's usually some kind of celebration of life ceremony
Mm-hmm.
or
Ritual.
something.
Right.
But when we're grieving something that we never had, it's more difficult to move through because it's intangible. And something that has helped me is journaling, just
Mm-hmm.
writing down things. And I might write with my non-dominant hand. I might write in different colors. Different colors might represent or evoke different emotions. Sometimes internal family systems or parts work is helpful. I might personify different thoughts and feelings and dialogue between them, or my wise adult self can view that grief or that anger and have a conversation either on paper or Sometimes I like to visualize them, or I even have little dollar store toys. I have a little Oscar the Grouch for when I'm feeling grumpy, and I just say, "Wow, you're feeling grumpy today, part of me. Tell me more. What's coming up for you?" And that really helps me to not be enveloped by those feelings, but to just witness them and kind of tenderly take care of
Mhm.
them.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's key. I've found journaling to be really helpful as well, Deb. And I use the same pen. I don't know why it's a thing, but we're not going to go there right now. Anyway, I use the same pen. But so I don't color or anything. But what I do is I write in different languages. And that has been really helpful to kind of even take, because I was in one world from in this age range, and I was in another world in this age range, and the dominant language in each of those ranges might be different. And then maybe I had a few weeks over here for work, for business, and I was in completely different language. And there are emotions that were evoked on that work trip, for example, that were maybe different than the emotions a month before as an adult when I was dealing with a different situation. And I've really, it's been interesting to see how parsing out those pieces, um, and allowing uh, those feelings to come in and look at them like this rather than all jumbled up like this, reduces that ball of stress to three little balls of stress, but you can see them. And it's almost to your point of it's not as enveloping, right? It's a way of being able to honor it, but also I've found it's a way I can reconnect with my body that I didn't know before. Like,
Mm.
I didn't know that, like, people feel things in, like, you have feelings are called feelings because you feel them in their body. I always thought, well, unless you hit me in the face, I'm not going to feel anything, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, but it's been really helpful that finding ways to creatively express those different pieces and break them apart rather than just dealing with them like this, especially when it comes to, I would imagine, for a friendship one that we're talking about in this
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah, I actually, just listening to each of you, there are a couple of things that I've sort of heard connecting and clicking for me is one, yes, absolutely grieve what you've lost, but also grieve what you realize you never had. And I think that that is a concept that's quite familiar to us as trauma survivors, especially childhood trauma, right? I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, right? Like in learning that I had to grieve a childhood that I never got to have. I've had to grieve not having parents who knew or understood what I needed. Being not just being like as having this experience of what happened to me as a kid, but also grieving parents grieving not having parents that understood what it meant to be the first person to be born in a different country that they grew up in.
Yeah.
Because they they were clueless, and I don't hold it against them, right? They just had no idea how to raise me. And then you add on this other layer of like all this other stuff that happened, like I at this point I'm just thankful I'm alive. But another thing that I also heard in us is, and I think this is really key, is when we are just when we're doing is trying to survive, um whatever that looks like for each of us. When you're in survival mode, nobody has time to get curious. And so I think one of the, going back to ways that we can cultivate emotionally safe and these mature relationships now, especially as adults, and coming into who we are, um can we give ourselves the time to get curious now? And can we explore those curiosities? I can say for me, without a doubt, if I hadn't let myself get curious about all the things I'm curious about, astrology, self healing, like spiritual practices, or the spiritual practice, or the spiritual component in practicing breath work, I definitely would not have the friends that I do right now. And for me, the reward has been by really making this effort and creating safety in my own body to, first of all, learn how to trust myself, to have the discernment of like, this is a person I want, who I can make a connection with, and this is probably somebody, a person or a relationship that wouldn't serve me, to have that discernment and to be able to trust myself, to know like where people fit in my life, and to be okay that not everybody is going to fit, and that I'm not going to fit for everybody. To really just be okay with that is huge. And so if we can learn how to trust ourselves, feel in our body what it's like to be safe around people, um, this idea of cultivating these meaningful relationships is very possible. And really just, I one big thing that I've really been healing through is like, there's really no shame in what you're curious about, as long as you're not causing harm, right? As long as your curiosities aren't causing harm to other people, right? um Explore it. Nobody's like, you know what, there are going to be people, like, let's be real, there are going to be people, and these are the people who probably just don't belong in your sphere, who are going to give you the side eye. But that's okay. Let them.
Yeah, and we don't have to please those people.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
so
And
listening to your story, be I just hear a story of someone who has discovered that it's okay to have boundaries, and
yes.
that those boundaries are actually what allows you to discern
Mm-hmm.
in your relationships which are worthy of your attention and which aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's okay. I mean, there's no way we can have relationships with everybody we encounter in life,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and part of that curiosity that you speak of is is what allows us to discern
Mm-hmm.
which of those relationships are going to be worthy of our time and effort and attention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I like that you brought up curiosity.
Yeah. Listen, if somebody's curious about how long it takes paint to dry on a wall, somebody else is going to be curious about it. Go
Yeah,
find each other.
and somebody's going to know.
Yeah. Yes. And somebody's going to know. I'm not judging, right? Like, I mean, I'm learning this through just exploring and really getting deep into astrology the way I've always wanted to. That's another thing is, you know, connect with your inner child. I feel like for somehow indirectly connecting with your inner child and allowing yourself to explore your inner child curiosities, if there are any, um, can help you make great connections with other people. It's There's
Absolutely.
this whole thing, yeah, like find your community. Um, I feel like at the end of the day, this is we're talking about friends, and when we're ready to expand that, those one or two friends could eventually expand into a community of friends. Or by joining a community, you may find one or two people who especially resonate with you, who will become your hype crew. I know that's been my story. And the prize has been, I get to be my authentic self. Like, I just get to be me. And it's so freeing to be around people who let me be me, quirks and all my woo woo talk and astrology. Like, everybody puts up with me. Some of you are even entertained by it. And it just really creates this lightness, in my heart, that I think we all deserve. We all deserve to get there.
Mm-hmm. You just used the word resonance, and
Mm,
that I mean, it just brings up this concept that, like, we're talking about a friendship wound here, where we've lost friendships and we
mhm,
grieve them. But there's also the concept that uh, we draw to people, we draw to ourselves people that we are in resonance with,
mm, mhm,
and that over the course of a life, that's going to change. We're going, if you're growing and you're healing and you're evolving, you're not always going to be drawing the same kind of people. And so
mhm,
it just makes me wonder if, like, um, perhaps we can, normalize the fact that some friendships go by the wayside,
Mm.
and that doesn't have to be necessarily a wound or a trauma. It can be, we're just not in resonance anymore, and that can be okay.
Yeah. 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 I'm glad you brought that up. Um, um, I was reading this article in the New York Times about this exact thing, is like what happens when you're ghosted by a friend. And it really spoke into the wounds that we're talking about. And so this writer spoke about it from her own experience of a friend having ghosted her and what that did to her emotionally, right? Like she was just questioning her own worthiness. Like, did I do anything wrong? Like, what did I do to deserve this? Like, I must have deserved it, right? And I just, like, I feel like, as you know, for anybody, this is all obviously very true, but then what else does it add on to our layers of our own trauma? And so I've heard this before too, and I'd love to know what you guys think about it, right? Like, the idea or the suggestion is that the mature thing to do and the compassionate thing to do is to literally, just like if you were going to break up with an intimate partner, you should break up with your friends with compassion, as in, like, you know we're not in resonance anymore. I just want you to know that, like, we're not going to talk. Like, I just don't feel like, there's a need for us to reach out to each other anymore, like, or however you may frame it. And literally when I read that, I was like, dude, I don't know about that. Like, and so, I don't want it to come off like, I'm going to be clear, right? Like, I've been ghosted and I've also done a ton of ghosting. Right? Like, that's just, like, nobody's ever told us that we had to break up with our friends. And so even just knowing this, and agreeing, like, yes, that is the compassionate thing to do sometimes. But I'm like, but is it though? Like, would I want to hear from somebody, like a friend, especially if it was coming out of nowhere, that, like, you don't want to be my friend anymore? Like, or would I be okay with just you ghosting and, like, sort of letting it fall by the wayside? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
I I think what it feels like is, it feels like it depends on the relationship and
Mm.
the not just the kind of relationship, but how deep and what it's built on. So
Mm.
if you're going to a place to, I don't know, beautify the parks in your neighborhood, right? And you decide, yeah, I'm not gonna do that anymore. I'm not gonna, and the only time I talk to those people is when I go there. It's like, I'm not gonna call them to tell them I don't want to be around them. I don't like beautifying parks in my neighborhood. Screw that, right?
Mm.
No, probably not. But if the relationship has lasted a while, and I feel, and a while is different for every person. For me, it's like a week. So for other people, it's probably longer, but whatever. So if it feels like it's been a while and you have a deep level, then maybe that's a different story. But all of this gets back to, what is it that it feels like? What
Mm.
feels right? And being honest with ourselves about not only how we feel, but what feels right in our bodies. Because
Mm.
I think we can also, if we tread on that boundary, right, that I had trouble with a few weeks ago, um, when I talked about, you know, not having contact with my parents anymore. Um, but we tread very close to blaming the victim, right? Saying, well, the responsible thing is you tell the person why you're not talking anymore, and then you just cut it off, even though
Mm.
that has probably already happened over multiple course multiple connections. But it's all about, how do you feel in your body, and be honest with yourself about that. And
Mm.
if it feels like the right thing to do is to go to that person, then go for it. And that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. That will be
Mm.
probably one of the hardest things, right? And that's
Yeah.
okay. But it's that it has to start with us checking in with our own selves and our own bodies, and being honest about that piece, even if it feels unsafe to
Mm.
to to go to that person, I'm not suggesting you do. I'm just suggesting
Mm-hmm.
it's not unsafe to check in with yourself, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Figuring out, why does it feel unsafe? Do I want to work through that?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where it has to start there, and then it will happen, right? But that has to be first. We got to be honest with ourselves.
I love that. I feel like, oh, Richard, go ahead.
Oh, I just feel like it's very contextual, as Oak
Mm-hmm.
alluded to. You know, it depends on the relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and on how we feel in our bodies, as Oak said. But yeah, I'm just thinking about the relationship that I spoke about at the beginning. Um, uh, that person and I did not have a really deep level of communication in our
Mm-hmm.
relationship. It was a long relationship, but it was kind of at a superficial level. And it would not be in the context of our relationship for me to speak very deeply about my deep felt reasons why I'm moving on, and to
Mm-hmm.
try to go deep with him and figure out what happened in that
Yeah.
relationship. And so, and I don't even think that either one of us held that as one of us ghosting the other one.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
just that our relationship diverged.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I think there are other cases where yeah, you would definitely want to communicate with someone, but I think to Oak's point, it's how you feel in your
It's
body
very
about
good.
But you know what? That's kind of the key, right? It's got to be. I think I'm passionate about this, and I didn't realize it till just now. So forgive me. But it has to be how you feel, where the boundary is for you, because I can tell you the reason I'm having such a hard time with this currently is the
Mm-hmm.
expectation from a cultural standpoint and from a societal standpoint is, if you have X kind of relationship or with Y kind of people, the
Mm-hmm.
expectation is, and then insert the expectation. The
Mm-hmm.
problem with that is we get right back to people pleasing, lack of setting
Yes.
boundaries, or using other people's boundaries, not our own,
Yeah.
and it spins you back into the cycle you were in before. And so it it really has to be, for me anyway, and I could, again, this could just be situational, but I need to understand what is appropriate in the context of my own mind, regardless of what culture or society or even my peer group might dictate. That's where it has to start. Because if it doesn't start there, we're just continuing in that trauma response, trauma response, trauma,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
that is such a great point, Oak. I mean, you bring in the whole like the layer of cultural and societal
Mm-hmm.
expectations here. You know, so much
Yeah.
of what we experience in our social networks are based upon our conditioning. And so I love it that you brought that up.
And I think people give us information. You know, if I'm always the one reaching out, there's some information there.
Mm-hmm.
And if I feel a sense of dread when I see their name and number come up on my phone, there's some information there, you
Information.
know,
Mm-hmm.
and I just need to maybe be paying attention to some details and interpret some information and see, you know, just I'd like to echo and reiterate the how do I feel in my body, because that a lot of times if I'm not in tune with what's going on with me physically, I might be missing some of that information that's available
Mm-hmm.
to me, and
Mm-hmm.
that's historically been a problem for me. So learning to be in attunement with myself, as well as with others, will guide my decisions and help me know whether or not to turn up or down the volume on my intensity with an interaction with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or
Mm-hmm.
is it somebody that I really miss and really want connection with if I don't hear from them for a while? Or do I not notice if we haven't spoken for weeks? There's some information there.
So I feel like we really reached this full circle kind of moment going back to the beginning of this conversation. We talked about why don't we ever talk about this friendship wound, right? And we conclude like, well, we started with like maybe we don't talk about it a lot because there's just so much nuance to it, right? So, and even what I'm hearing about is like even at the end in concluding this conversation, when we think about even concluding a relationship in this context, there's still a lot of nuance, right? It's like, to your point, like, who are you, culture and society, to tell me that it all has to be this way?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or and what, it what I'm hearing is like, it just comes back to attunement too, right? Not just being attuned to the relationship. It's not just attunement to, the dynamic that exists between you and this other person specifically, but it's also your attunement to yourself, and just moving forward with what feels right for you.
Perhaps most importantly, even
Mhm.
attunement to self.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for joining us today. That's all we have on the friendship wound for now. Let us know how this landed. Have you ever ghosted a friend, or has a friend ever ghosted you out of the blue? Remember, it's okay to grieve the end of a friendship, no matter how it happened. Grief is a normal process and a healthy response to some deeply painful wounds, and it allows us to let go of the sorrow, to make space for peace within. It takes courage to process grief, and you don't have to go it alone. We encourage you to reach out and find support, whether that's through another trusted friend or family member, an online group, community spaces, or even with a skilled mental health coach or therapist. We've dropped some resources for you below. Until then, be well, and remember that you have amazing power. Until next time.